Women simply aren't suited for this type of work, Richard declared, leaning back in his chair with his hands clasped behind his head as if he'd just uttered something profoundly wise. It's nothing personal. Sandra, finance is a high arena. Kevin is the obvious choice for a task like this. Sitting across the table, my jaw clenched as I gazed at the spreadsheet I'd spent hours meticulously preparing. I longed to crumple the papers, but I forced myself to maintain my composure. Richard, I began calmly, I've been managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for the past 6 years. My firm's performance has consistently ranked among the top 5 in the region. He waved a dismissive hand. I'm sure you're excellent at what you do there, but this is a family matter. We require someone who can concentrate on our specific objectives, and Kevin grasps what's at stake. Kevin, seated smugly beside him, grinned as if he'd already won the lottery. He was 24, fresh out of business school, and had never even balanced a personal budget before this. Yet, because he was Richard's biological son, he was apparently considered a financial prodigy in their eyes. I looked at Kevin, his confidence more irritating than his lack of experience. Kevin, what's your strategy for managing the portfolio? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He blinked, taken aback. Well, he stammered, I thought I'd begin with some high-growth tech stocks, ride the wave. Richard nodded approvingly. Exactly. Bold moves, that's precisely what this portfolio requires. My stomach churned. Bold moves. That was their plan. I had dedicated a decade of finance, meticulously analyzing risk and reward, constructing diversified portfolios, and studying market trends. And now I was being told that my expertise was insufficient simply because I was a woman. My name is Sandra, and for as long as I can recall, I've had to struggle to be taken seriously as a financial analyst. I've ascended in an industry where being underestimated is almost commonplace. But this was different. This wasn't a casual colleague making a condescending remark in a meeting. This was my stepfather dismissing me in favor of my stepbrother, a man with no experience, no credentials, and no idea what he was doing. I became part of Richard's family when I was 12, after my mom remarried. He had always been stern, but in his own way, fair, treating my stepbrother and me equally until now. His favoritism toward Kevin had become more obvious over the years. And it was never clearer than at this moment, the family portfolio wasn't merely a casual investment. It was the culmination of years of effort intended to secure a comfortable future for all of us. I had meticulously reviewed the numbers, outlining a comprehensive plan to maximize returns while mitigating risk. But none of that mattered. Richard's biases ran deeper than I had realized. As I drove home that evening, my mind raced with frustration. It's not personal, Richard had said, but it couldn't have felt more personal. I had worked tirelessly to prove myself in a field dominated by men, only to have my own family completely disregard my capabilities. When I walked through the door, my husband Mike was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He looked up and smiled. "How'd it go?" he asked. I sighed, dropping my bag onto the counter. "It was a disaster," I said, recounting the conversation. Richard handed the portfolio to Kevin. "Apparently, women aren't cut out for finance." Mike frowned, setting down the knife. "He actually said that verbally," I replied, pouring myself a glass of water. And Kevin just sat there grinning as if he'd already made his first million. Mike shook his head. That's absurd. You've been doing this for years. Kevin probably doesn't even know how to read a balance sheet. Precisely, I said, my voice rising. But it doesn't matter. Richard views me as a risk and Kevin as a reward, even though the numbers indicate the opposite. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wouldn't waste any more energy trying to change Richard's mind. Instead, I would let my work speak for itself. My firm's portfolio had been growing consistently, and I was already in discussions to lead a high-stakes project that could put my team on the map. If Richard wanted to believe that Kevin was a financial genius, fine. But in a year, when everything settled, I knew exactly whose results would stand out and whose would crumble under the weight of overconfidence. For now, I would step back and let them play their game. But I couldn't help but feel a surge of determination as I envisioned the moment when the truth would finally come to light. For the initial few weeks after the meeting, I tried not to dwell on the portfolio. It wasn't easy. Every time Kevin posted a vague crushing it in finance update on social media, or Richard made an offhand remark about Kevin's grand plans, I felt my blood boil. But I kept my head down and concentrated on my own work. At my firm, things were progressing rapidly. I had recently been assigned to manage a high-profile client portfolio, and I poured all my energy into developing a strategy that was both innovative and secure. Late nights at the office became routine, and the hours spent analyzing trends and running projections were exhausting but gratifying. My colleague and mentor, Laura, noticed my extra effort one evening as we worked late. "You're really giving your all to this one, aren't you?" she said, leaning against my desk. I nodded, a faint smile on my face. "It feels personal," I admitted. Laura raised an eyebrow. "The client." "No," I said, shaking my head. "My stepfather, he overlooked me for managing the family's portfolio, gave it to my stepbrother instead. Said women aren't suited for finance." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "He actually said that." "Yep," I replied, the word heavy with bitterness. "So now I'm making it my mission to prove him wrong." Meanwhile, back at home, the cracks in Kevin's supposed success were beginning to appear at family dinners. Richard's once proud updates about Kevin's investments became more vague. "It's a long-term strategy," he said one evening when I asked about the portfolio's performance. "Long-term," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's code for it's not working right now." "What exactly is he investing in?" Richard bristled, clearly annoyed by my question. "It's none of your business, Sandra. Kevin has it under control." I let it go, but inside, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I'd seen this happen too many times before, overconfident investors chasing high-risk stocks without understanding the market. It was only a matter of time before the cracks turned into a full-blown collapse. At work, things were heading in the opposite direction. The portfolio I managed began exceeding expectations, and clients were delighted with the returns. Word spread quickly, and I was soon invited to present my strategy at a regional finance conference. It was a significant event, the kind of recognition that could propel my career to the next level. Laura was ecstatic when I told her, "This is your moment," she said. "Make it count." The night before the conference, as I practiced my presentation in the mirror, I thought about Richard and Kevin. A part of me wanted to send them an invitation, just to see the look on their faces when I walked onto the stage. But I resisted the urge. This wasn't about them. This was about proving to myself and the industry that I belonged here. That as the months passed, the disparity between Kevin's performance and mine became impossible to ignore. While my firm's portfolio continued to grow, Richard started hinting that things weren't going so well on Kevin's end at first. It was small comments about market volatility and unforeseen challenges, but eventually the truth slipped out at another family dinner. Rich sighed heavily as we passed around dessert. It's been a tough quarter, he admitted. Kevin's portfolio has taken some hits. I looked up from my plate, keeping my expression neutral. Hits? What kind of hits? Richard hesitated, clearly reluctant to elaborate. Nothing catastrophic, he said quickly. Just some setbacks. Kevin, who had been unusually quiet all evening, suddenly chimed in. It's a tough market right now, he said defensively. No one's seeing big returns. That's not true, I said before I could stop myself. Plenty of portfolios are thriving right now if they're managed well. The room fell silent, and I could feel Rich's glare burning into me. Not everyone has the luxury of working with institutional clients, Sandra, he said sharply. Family portfolios are different. I nodded, biting back the retort that was on the tip of my tongue. Let them believe what they wanted. I didn't need to defend myself. My results spoke for themselves. By the time the 1-year mark arrived, the disparity was undeniable. Kevin's portfolio was struggling, weighed down by poor decisions and overconfidence. Meanwhile, my firm's results were being featured in industry publications, and I had just been named one of the top financial analysts in the region. The recognition came with an invitation to an awards gala where I would be presented with a plaque for innovative portfolio management. As I stood on stage that evening, accepting the award, I thought about Richard and Kevin. They weren't in the audience, of course, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they heard about this. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got a call from Richard. Sandra, he said, his tone unusually measured. I saw your name in the Financial Times. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice calm. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I had no idea your firm was doing so well, he said finally. I suppose I underestimated you. You did, I said simply. But I appreciate you saying that. The breakthrough occurred in the most unexpected way. Richard had always prided himself on staying informed about financial markets, reading industry magazines and watching the news religiously. But one evening, as I was finishing a presentation at work, I received a call from my husband, Mike. You're not going to believe this, he said, his tone laced with humor. Richard's glued to the TV. Your firm's results are being featured on MarketWatch Live. They just mentioned your name. I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. What did they say? They called you one of the top-performing portfolio managers in the region, Mike replied. Richard's been silent for 20 minutes. A mix of pride and anticipation welled up inside me. For months, I'd been working tirelessly, achieving milestones that Richard had dismissed as impossible. And now, the proof was on national television. The next day, Richard called me, his voice noticeably subdued. Sandra, he began. I saw the segment on MarketWatch last night. I had no idea your firm was doing so well. I let his words hang in the air for a moment before replying, "Thank you. We've been working hard." He hesitated, then sighed. "I have to admit, I may have misjudged you. Your results are impressive." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of satisfaction and vindication. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, "but it's not about the recognition. It's about making smart, informed decisions. And that's something I've been doing for years." Richard didn't respond right away. Finally, he said, "Do you have time to come by this weekend? I'd like to talk." When I arrived at Rich's house on Saturday, the atmosphere was different. He greeted me at the door with none of his usual bravado, and Kevin was noticeably absent. As we sat in the living room, Richard cleared his throat and handed me a folder. "These are the latest figures from the family portfolio," he said, his voice low. "I thought you might want to take a look." I opened the folder and scanned the numbers. The losses were worse than I'd expected. Several high-risk investments had plummeted, wiping out a significant portion of the portfolio's value. It was a stark contrast to the growth I'd achieved with my firm's clients. "Kevin told me it was just market volatility," Richard said, breaking the silence. "But after seeing your results, I'm starting to think it might be something else." "It's not just the market," I said, choosing my words carefully. "It's the decisions being made. Managing a portfolio requires more than just bold moves. It requires strategy, discipline, and a deep understanding of risk." Richard nodded slowly, his expression pained. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving Kevin control. I wanted to give him a chance to prove himself. "But I see now that I underestimated you and overestimated him." Hearing those words from Richard felt surreal. For so long, he had dismissed me, refused to see my potential, and brushed aside my expertise. And now, sitting across from him, I saw something I'd never seen before. Regret. "I owe you an apology, Sandra," he said quietly. "I let my biases cloud my judgment. You've worked so hard, and I didn't give you the credit you deserved. That was wrong." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The vindication I'd craved was finally here, but it felt bittersweet. "Thank you," I said at last. "I appreciate that, but this isn't just about me. It's about what's best for the family. And if you want the portfolio to recover, we need to make some serious changes." Richard nodded, his expression resolute. "I'd like you to take over," he said, "if you're willing." I spent the next hour walking Richard through my recommendations, outlining a strategy to stabilize the portfolio and rebuild its value. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was confident we could turn things around. As I spoke, I saw something shift in Rich's demeanor, newfound respect that had been missing for far too long. When we finished, Richard leaned back in his chair and let out a deep sigh. "Sandra," he said, "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do this, not after the way I treated you. But you did? That says a lot about your character." I smiled, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. "This isn't about proving a point," I said. "It's about doing what's right for everyone." The days following our meeting felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of frustration when I thought about my stepfather. Richard had finally acknowledged my abilities, not just as a financial professional, but as someone worthy of his respect. It wasn't an instant fix for the years of dismissal, but it was a start dot at the next family dinner. The tension that usually accompanied conversations about finances was notably absent. Richard even mentioned the new strategy I had proposed. Sandra's got the portfolio on the right track, he said, glancing at me across the table. I should have listened to her sooner. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. He hadn't said much since Richard had taken back control of the portfolio, and I couldn't help but notice the flicker of resentment in his expression. Part of me wanted to gloat, but I pushed the thought aside. This wasn't about Kevin. It was about ensuring the family's financial future was secure. Later that evening, as I helped clear the table, Richard pulled me aside. I know I've said it before, he began, his voice low, but I really am sorry for how I treated you. I let my biases get in the way, and I was wrong. I looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. Thank you, Richard, I said. That means a lot. And I want you to know I'm not holding any grudges. I just want to make sure we're all moving in the right direction. He nodded, his expression softening. You've got my full support from now on. I'm trusting you to handle things. Hearing those words felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For so long, I'd been fighting to be seen, to prove that my abilities weren't tied to my gender or my place in the family. Now, I finally felt validated, not because I'd won, but because Richard had grown enough to see the truth. Over the following months, life settled into a new normal. With Richard's support, I fully took over managing the family portfolio. It wasn't just about undoing Kevin's mistakes. It was about building a system that could withstand challenges in the years to come. I poured my knowledge into creating a diverse, balanced strategy, and the results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months, the portfolio began to recover, slowly but steadily. Richard kept his word and stayed out of my way, only stepping in to ask thoughtful questions or offer genuine praise when he saw the returns improving. It was a stark contrast to the man who had once dismissed me outright. The change wasn't just about respect. It was about trust. For the first time, I felt like he truly saw me not as the stepdaughter, but as a capable professional. One evening, as we sat in his living room reviewing the latest performance reports, Richard leaned back and sighed. You know, Sandra, he began. I used to think I had all the answers, but this past year has taught me something important. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you the most. I smiled, setting down the report. It's never too late to learn, I said gently. He nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. You've done more for this family than I can put into words. Thank you. Hearing those words felt like the closure I didn't know I needed for so long. I'd been driven by the need to prove myself, but now that drive felt different. It wasn't about validation anymore. It was about knowing my worth and standing firm in it. Outside of the family, my career continued to thrive. My success with the family portfolio garnered the attention of other clients, leading to new opportunities and challenges at work. The recognition I'd received at the awards gala was only the beginning, and I finally felt like I was stepping into the career I'd always envisioned at home. The dynamic with Richard had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. He'd grown more supportive, not just of my professional efforts, but of me as a person. The tension that once defined our relationship was replaced with mutual respect. And while it didn't erase the past, it gave me hope for the future. The journey wasn't easy, but it taught me something invaluable. You can't force people to see your worth. Sometimes you just have to keep doing the work, letting your results speak louder than their doubts. And when the recognition finally comes, it's not about their apology. It's about knowing you've always been capable, even when they couldn't see it. As I left Richard's house that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. I had finally claimed my place, not just in the family, but in my own life.